Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. With the Mayhem event starting in just a few hours, I thought I would put together my plans for what I'm going to be doing in the event. This will be a little bit about my Atlas strategy, but it's mostly about the build I'll be playing, which is a Wave of Conviction Ignite Elementalist. Now I'm going to be playing this in softcore trade, but this can be done in solo self-found by the dedicated, courtesy of some 3.19 buffs, and those buffs are to the Divination card that drops Berek's Respite, which seems to have been made 12 to 15 times more common in patch 3.19 than it used to be. The strengths of this build are clear speed and the potential to often one-shot mini-bosses like Rogue Exiles, which are going to be everywhere in the Mayhem event, and that's why I went with it. If you can hit one of those with your Wave of Conviction, which is pretty easy because Wave of Conviction hits a lot of the screen, there's a realistic chance that you will take it out in one hit once you're geared, and before you're geared, you'll be able to take it down in two. The weaknesses, however, this is not a boss killer build. I'll probably be able to get down Uber Elder, Maven, and the 4-way Maven's Invitations that are not Maven's Invitation the Hidden with it, but this is not a build that I would take into really hard bosses. This is definitely not one to take to Uber bosses. Additionally, it's a pretty squishy build. This build is somewhat of a glass cannon. Now that can seem strange when it doesn't have a huge amount of damage. The reason it's a glass cannon is that it's hitting the entire screen at once, and that's really what you're wanting to go for. When you strike one enemy with this build and you inflict a shock and an ignite on it, then you will find that that proliferates to all sorts of enemies around the screen. Those enemies will start burning down pretty quickly. Some of them will explode because you're going to be using the Obliteration Wand, at least when clearing. That's a goal here, and it is something that is somewhat specialized to the Mayhem event. You could potentially modify this substantially to make it into something that's more of a boss killer or that's more tanky, but at that point you're basically talking about making a new build entirely. Anyways, so why Wave of Conviction? The skill hits really hard. It's got 330% base damage, which is one of the highest base damage numbers in the entire game. There are skills that hit harder than this, but they all have pretty clunky restrictions. They either have long cooldowns or they're skills that require damage projection supports. So Fireball hits harder, for instance, but you kind of need greater multiple projectiles on that. And Discharge hits much harder, but Discharge has a cooldown and also requires you to manage charges. So Wave of Conviction just hits really hard. It also inflicts exposure, and as an Elementalist, you can amp up that exposure even more. Being physical converted to elemental allows you a few additional scaling axes on the character. Herald of Ash comes to mind, as does the support gem Awakened added fire support. We're going to go Elementalist so all the damage ignites, the lightning damage isn't wasted, and we don't need to invest an entire ring slot into the unique ring Stormfire. Instead, our lightning damage is just going to set things on fire too. Now for our endgame build, we don't really need to reinvent the wheel here. There is an outstanding build guide that's been put together by content creator Rarity, which I'll put a link to down below. And this is for a different build, but it's one that recommends using Wave of Conviction Ignite until you've got together about 20 Divine Orbs or so that you can transition into the real build. And so Rarity's Wave of Conviction Ignite setup is our starting point. Of course, you're going to modify this for your own requirements, but this is a solid starting setup. I'll put a link to Rarity's information down in the description below. We'll start with this and we're going to modify it during play. One thing that's really important is that we've got the Elemental Overload Keystone. I want to talk about that later, because it is going to be massively overestimated. If you look at the damage output of this character on Path of Building, that's going to be massively overestimated, but we're still taking that keystone anyway. Unique rarities in 3.19 were changed. Some items like Diala's Malefaction were buffed, and these were often made more rare. Some other items that weren't changed had their rarities reduced, and one of these was Berek's Respite. This used to be tier 1 rarity in patch 3.18. This is the same rarity as Arakali's Fang, and it's about 4 times as rare as Chevron's Wrappings. It is now tier 3 rarity, I'm pretty confident of that, and this means that it's something like 15 to 20 times as common as it was just a few months ago. The Divination card for this powerful ring went from roughly Doctor rarity to being substantially more common than the Nurse. Now we only need 2 of this Divination card in order to get ourselves a Berek Respite, and for this reason I feel like Berek's Respite is something that a dedicated player, you don't need to be obsessed, but you do need to be someone that's willing to be fairly focused. You're going to be able to farm that in a 10-day event if you want to. Alternately, if you're playing in trade enabled, you can just farm one of them and then buy the other one. For getting Berek's Respite, this item is absolutely incredible on this build. It is something that makes everything come together because it essentially allows you to remove a low performing support gem, which would either be Ignite Proliferation support or Elemental Proliferation support, and replace it with a pure damage one. And Berek's Respite covers all of the utility that was previously on that support gem. So the Spark and the Flame Divination card drops in the Atoll map and the Plateau map. The item's incredible for the build as we're going to be shocking and igniting, and this will allow us to get essentially a free additional support gem. Now you can trade for this item, but you do want to have a backup plan in case it turns out that the item is hard to source in trade, or alternately in case you're playing in solo self-found. Now, this card is rare, but it's not staggeringly rare. In 3.19, it seems to be 65 times as rare as the common card Loyalty, and 20 times as rare as the reasonably common card Humility. Many of you will be familiar with what it takes to farm a set of Humility. It's about 4 times as long in order to farm yourself a set of Spark and the Flame. Unfortunately, though, being a set of 2 variants is going to be really substantial on these. I suspect you'll see 1 card per 30 maps if you well can go, and that matches some testing that I did in the Calandra League with it. Now, add abysses to maps if you want to get more drops, and additionally in the Mayhem event, there's going to be a lot of extra monsters present as well, and they'll also potentially have more chances to drop the Spark and the Flame as well. So you plan for the Axe. It is probably optimal in Act 1 to play the Orb of Storms and Stormblast Mine setup, but I am so sick of that. I'll probably play it anyway, but I am really overplaying with that, and I would like to see something else be reasonably good in Act 1 for the Witch. It's definitely optimal from there on to do the rest of the Axe as Armageddon Brand Ignite, but I'm the sort of player that tends to like to play my endgame build or something reasonably resembling it as early as possible. For that reason, I'm thinking I will transition in Act 2 into Wave of Conviction Hit. So this will be a character that is hitting monsters using Wave of Conviction. Then in Act 4, when Ignite Proliferation and the first Labyrinth are both online, I'll be switching over to Ignite. At that point, from then onwards, I will be in some version of the final build. Our reservations during the Axe will be a low-level Clarity, a Herald of Ash, and one of Malevolence, Haste, Grace, and Determination, whichever of those feels best. You could also experiment with Herald of Purity here as well, and that just comes down to whether you want more damage or whether you want to get more defenses. Really, that's going to be a personal choice. Supports in the Axe post-transition, you want to pick 3 of these. Added Fire support, Combustion support, Ignite Proliferation support, Burning Damage support, Cruelty support, and Deadly Ailment support. Whatever you do, don't take both of the last 2. They have a really bad counter synergy with each other. So pick one of them. I don't think one of them is clearly better than the other, so you can just experiment with both of them, find the one that works best for you, but do not use Cruelty and Deadly Ailments together on the same character. There's a number of other supports that'll work as well, like Swift Affliction. So I said we'd come back to Elemental Overload. Your uptime on this is going to be pretty low, so spells that have dealt a critical strike in the past 8 seconds deal 40% more elemental damage with hits and with ailments. Ailments being the part that matters here, because your ailments are your ignite damage. The drawback of this is that your critical strikes do not deal extra damage, your critical strike multiplier is basically set to 100%, and various procs that trigger on getting an ailment with a critical strike don't proc anymore. So your uptime on this is going to be pretty low, but it is still great value for 1 point, and you're pathing right near it anyway, so for that reason you want to take it. Just be aware that Path of Building is going to massively overestimate how good this is, and you should treat it as though it's only up about 30% of the time, because I think that's about what it's going to be in practice. You will want some investment in crit with this. Shield mods that add critical strike chance to spells are an option, but there's plenty of others as well, and that's something I'm going to try and work on the best way to solve as we start to play around with the character later on. So my early mapping plan. I want to rush Shaping the Skies, Shaping the Valleys, Shaping the Mountains, and Shaping the Seas, which are all of the Atlas mods that grant 25% to your chance of getting a map to drop 1 tier higher. As well as that, I also want to take all 5 of the Master Mission Replenish nodes, and the Kirak one of those is probably the most important one to have early. This is going to ensure that I've got access to whatever content I feel like running during the Mayhem event. You don't need to take all 5 of the Master Mission Replenish nodes if you know you've got no interest in running Jun, for instance. Then you can just ignore Jun. Now, during this phase of mapping, ignore all Tier 4 and Tier 6 maps that are not Atoll or Plateau. So Atoll and Plateau have base tiers of 4 and 6 respectively. What this means is that if you've got another Tier 4 map, you should not run it. You should instead just sit on it for the moment, keep going, and keep stockpiling more and more Atolls and Plateaus as you run higher tier maps. So as you keep running your higher tier maps, you'll find that you get more and more of these Atolls and Plateaus dropping for you, and then you'll be able to just blitz a whole bunch of them back to back, hopefully get your 2 copies of the Spark and the Flame. This is the way to do it if you're in solo self-found. If you're in trade, you can skip over this step by using trade. I believe this to be the easiest way to get this item. Other uniques to look for. You want Obliteration. This has a Divination card which drops in the Delve Mines and is pretty common. It's nearly useless on bosses, but this is an absolute god tier item when it comes to killing trash. The reason is that enemies you kill have a 20% chance to go boom, dealing a quarter of their maximum life as chaos damage. Because you are an Elementalist with Shaper of Flames, this is going to inflict a massive ignite on that enemy. Because you're an Elementalist with Shaper of Storms, this is also going to inflict a massive shock on those enemies. This is going to cause them to burn pretty severely. These ignites, when you do kill that enemy, are then going to be proliferated through the use of your Berek's Respite, and nearby enemies are also going to go boom. This is going to be fun. That is something that you want to definitely get your hands on as soon as is practical. This is not a very rare item at all. For boss killing, the Unique Scepter Singularity will do the job, although that's tier 3 rarity. Alternately, you can get a rare scepter that has any 2 of these mods. Tier 3 or better fire damage, fire dot multi, +1 to fire skills, +1 to fizz skills, +1 to all skills, or also +1 to lightning skills. I did forget that when I was writing up this guide. Otherwise, you're just going to use general good stuff items mostly. So let's start talking about Atlas plans, and here we are going to embrace the Mayhem. This is my plan. This is probably not a good plan. This is about having fun. This is not about being efficient. So I'm going to be totally embracing the Mayhem with a bit of a silly strategy here. I'm going to be allocating Exiled Will, which is the node that causes all rogue exiles in your maps to be possessed by a tormented spirit. I'm going to be allocating Ruckus, which grants maps a chance to have 20 additional rogue exiles in them. I'm going to be allocating Unrelenting Torment and Seance, which also spec even further into this tormented theme, where monsters that are possessed by ghosts get additional drops, and Seance causes 5 random rare monsters within the map to be possessed. So we're going to have tormented monsters everywhere, which are really, really deadly. However, they're going to have quite a lot of drops, and I think this is just going to be a little bit of fun. I really don't recommend this if you're looking for smooth play, but if you're looking for some total and utter chaos, then this is the way to go. So you're then going to run maps that have rogue exiles as their Mayhem content mod, and when you do run one of these, you've got an 8% chance to get an extra 20 rogue exiles for a total of 40, but even if that doesn't proc, you're going to have 20 rogue exiles in the zone, they're all going to be Torment Spirit enhanced, and you're going to find a whole bunch of other stuff to kill in there. You'll be dying a lot, but you'll probably have a blast doing it. Unless, of course, you're someone that doesn't want to die a lot, in which case, just completely ignore everything I just said, and play a more traditional Atlas that's more sensible than I'm doing. Now, I expect some of you are thinking, okay, that's a cool plan for the first 60 or 70 points, what do I do with the rest of the points that I get during the league? And my suggestion here is that you go for something that amps up one of the other Mayhem mods. I'm personally going to go Breach with the rest of mine, because there is a Mayhem mod that causes zones to have 10 additional breaches. But if you feel like something a bit different, you could definitely do Delirium. You would spec the nodes that amp up the Delirium mirror, as that's going to be in a lot of zones as well. Really, it's up to you. Few mana reservations. You're going to want Herald of Purity and Herald of Ash, both of which will scale damage. So Herald of Purity's buff effect causes you as a character to do more physical damage. Herald of Ash's buff effect causes your skills that deal physical damage to deal a portion of that added as extra fire. So these two work really well together in giving you a bunch of extra damage, because Wave of Conviction deals physical damage first, then some of that is converted to lightning, some of that to fire, and then from gear and the passive tree, we're going to convert all the rest of it to fire. So it's going to end up with 25% of it as lightning damage, 75% as fire damage, and then Herald of Ash is just going to add an extra bunch of fire damage on top of that, as will potentially added fire damage support if we end up using that. Defensively, you're going to use some combination of Temper Shield, Defiance Banner, Determination, and Grace, and this is going to take a bit of experimenting with in order to get it right. During leveling, I'm probably just going to start with Herald of Purity, Herald of Ash, Temper Shield, and Defiance Banner. That's 85% reserved. That may be too much, in which case Temper Shield's probably going to get turned off for a while. And then Grace and Determination will be being leveled. Once we get into maps, at that point, we'll be able to do some things to improve our reservation efficiency. And then at that point, we'll be able to turn on Determination, and then later to turn on Grace as well. Okay, so the most important thing you're going to want to craft on this character is a set of conversion gloves. We want to convert all of the damage away from physical, as this opens a couple of possibilities. Firstly, it opens the option of running physical reflect maps, and secondly, it causes some of the nodes in the Templar area especially that grant increased elemental damage to be quite a bit better. So 50% conversion away from elemental comes from Wave of Conviction skill itself, 40% comes from a Fire Mastery. Where do we get the last 10%? Well, there's a bunch of options on gloves. You can use a Veiled mod, you can use bench crafted mods, or you can use Eldritch Implicits. Probably the lowest opportunity cost of these is the bench craft, and this does require you to unveil the mod first. Now, if you do have a choice between multiple physical damage conversion mods, then you want to unveil Fire first, if that's an option. You want to unveil Cold second, if that's an option. And your last choice is Lightning. Otherwise, though, you'll probably only get one of these, in which case, just take whichever one you've got and bench craft it for now, and then you can upgrade it to the perfect one later. You don't actually need a good roll on it, 20% is enough. At that point, you've got 100% conversion happening. Now remember that Rog is your friend for making life and resist gloves, even with spell suppression on top if you get really lucky. And fractured items can work too, fractured items with essences in particular. You can go for just good implicits, you don't need to go for the absolutely perfect ones. What I did here when I was making this set of gloves that's called Crafting Project on the PathOfExile website was I just started applying Eldritch Icors until I got something that was useful in each implicit slot. I didn't chase perfection in either. Herald of Ash has 23% increased buff effect. That's useful. It's not perfect, but it's useful. Likewise, 25% chance to hinder enemies on hit with spells. This does something serviceable for us, unless you're using the unique Scepter Singularity, and for that reason, it's something that you're quite happy to see there. For your chest upgrade path, you're going to start with 4-link leveling garbage. You're then going to upgrade to 5-link early endgame gear with stats, or a Tabula Rasa. Now, as a trade note, if you're going for Tabula, trade for the Divination card Vanity rather than the Divination card Humility. If you hit a useful Corrupt on it, amazing. If you hit a good for someone else Corrupt, but not for you, like +2 to projectile skills, sell it for 12 to 15 times the price of a Vanity card, and then use this as a bit of a mulligan on what you get from Vanity. Keep going until you get something that's either terrible for everyone, in which case you use it, it's still a Tabula, or until you get something that is perfect for you. Your next step after a Tabula or a Corrupted Tabula is to farm or trade into either the Chains That Bind or Dapper Prodigy in order to get yourself a starter 6-link, or you could potentially loot one as a Heist Enchanted Armament, or trade into a 6-link, or drop one from an Arch Nemesis. Deafening Greed it until it's okay, Benchcraft or Resist, and then apply Eldritch Implicits until you get something useful. Finally, as your top step, you could use Shadow Stitch, you could use Skin of the Loyal or Skin of the Lords, or you could use a Shaper and or Redeemer item that has amazing prefixes. Shaper will provide +1 to the level of socketed skill gems, Redeemer will provide +1 to the level of socketed supports. Both of these together can be really good, especially if you've got yourself an Empower, although of course there won't be that much chance to get an Empower level 4 during an event that's as short as this one. For your boots, you probably won't change all that many times here. From the Exarch mod pool, you have Move Speed, Action Speed, Scorched Ground, or a Needed Resistance as useful mods. For the Eater pool, you've got Move Skill, Cooldown Reduction, you've got Physical Damage added as extra of an element, you've got Faster Ignites, and you've got Elemental Ailment Avoidance as useful mods. There's probably a couple of others too, those are the ones that come to mind. Alternative is you can use Fugitive Boots or Two-Tone Boots that have Classic influence. When I say Classic, I mean not Searing Exarch and Eater of Worlds, I mean the ones that existed before that, Elder Slayer, Shaper, or Elder. Hunter Tailwind is good, Hunter Faster Ignite is good, Redeemer Increased Effective Non-Damaging Ailments is good, and Shaper Elemental Ailment Avoidance is good. But be warned, Tailwind uptime will be low for exactly the same reason as we were talking about with Elemental Overload. You're just not going to be critting all that often on this build, and you will need to get power charges somewhere. For the base mods, you're going to want Life, Move Speed, which can be a Veiled mod, Resist, and Spell Suppression if you can get it, although that's going to be hard to get. You can start crafts with Rog here, or with Essences. Feel free to accept much worse than what I've pictured here. And one thing that I like doing with boots a lot is trying to trade for ones that have got a high tier of Spell Suppression as a Fractured mod, but that aren't on a perfect base. So instead of Dragon Scale boots, if you've got a significantly worse base, but someone's had it drop somewhere and it has a tier 3 Spell Suppression as a Fractured mod when they've identified it, they might sell that for 30 Chaos, you can snipe that, and then you can turn around and put a Deafening Essence on it in order to get one of the resists guaranteed to be 46 to 48, or alternately 31 to 45 if it's Chaos, and then keep applying those essences until you get a good second suffix with it. Once you've got a good second, then all it's left to do is to lock suffixes, which is expensive, it does cost 2 Divine Orbs, then apply a Veiled Chaos Orb, and you've got a reasonably good chance of getting a very high tier move speed roll from that Veiled mod. Alternately, you could even use an Ashling 4 at that point. Lots of options there. So that's your boots covered. For your other slots, basically you're just going to be looking for good stuff rares. In trade softcore only, you can probably pick up a Pure Intelligence shield that has +1 to the level of all physical skills, or +1 lightning, or +1 fire, or a high tier +% fire damage. All of these are individually rare rolls, but you only need one of them. 5% pretty much only exists at high tier on intelligence shields that come from ROG. They're rare there too, but that is the main location that they'll come from. Alternately, instead of having a Pure Intelligence shield, you can go for a Spell Suppression shield. This will be one that has a Dexterity requirement that's not 0, because that's the only things that can roll Spell Suppression. As soon as you have a non-zero Strength requirement or a non-zero Dex requirement, you can no longer roll these damage mods. Really, this comes down to personal preference. Are you prioritizing staying alive, or are you prioritizing setting the world on fire? That's your choice. Now, no enchants are super important on your helmet, and as an optional respec, you can respec the character into Frostblink Ignite, which is a quite different build, but something that has a lot in common. For your helmet, you might want to consider a Deafening Essence of Loathing craft that has Eldritch Implicits for mana reservation reduction as well. This is one of the more powerful helmets you'll be able to get in this event, and will solve a lot of problems for you. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. There will be updates as I learn where the character experiences some sorts of pain points in progression, and we'll be able to update on what I've found out from that. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.